Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on Monday, February the 20th, the year 2012, or 2012, whichever way you like to say it. Well, our panel is getting ready, so let's right now turn things over to Jack Ryan. Good afternoon, Jack.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We still got our music? There we go. That song always, I always thought that part that says, "You'll have the time of your life." I said, "I'm going to dance with his wife." Like, how quaint. Someone actually dance with his wife. We are unique, though, I guess, aren't we? Yeah, this is President's Day. President's Day, Anno Domini 2012, the year of our Lord, which is an old way they used to say it in most of the books. I see a lot of the Catholic publications have abandoned that, going to a common era. Yeah. Don't you think they stick with AD and BC at least now?
Absolutely.
Incredible, isn't it? What?
And when did the Common Era begin? With the birth of Christ.
Jesus. Which was probably maybe not the exact time, but let's cut us a little slack there. And maybe he was probably born in April too. But you know why? Of course, they changed to December. They were superseding a Roman holiday of Saturnalia, which was what the equinox, or the solstice.
Also the Feast of the Unconquered Sun, which had taken root in Rome at that time. Solus Invictus, the unconquered sun.
That was during the reign of Gluteus Maximus?
he was in that Three Stooges film, I think, wasn't he?
That was King Root and Tootin'.
Yeah. He had a brother Circus Maximus, too, didn't he?
Pardon?
I said he had a brother Circus Maximus.
Anyhow, how should we start here? Musketeer roll call? Should we start? We'll leave. We have a guest, but we'll get to our guest later. We've got Mayor Emanuel is sitting in with us today, so we'll get to him later. Right to my straight to left is John Koscielko.
I'm never to anyone's left.
Oh!
But I'm John S. Koscielko, and very glad to be here on President's Day.
You're to my left.
And I'm Ken Little from Wright College, and formerly with the Chicago Fire Department, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Rich Lang, longtime student of Ken Little's history class, done some history teaching in the past, and otherwise retired.
And I'm Jeanette Frontier. Almost forgot who I was. And I was had a program on WJJG. I right now manage a country club out in Glen Ellen. So in between, I love this as my great outlet and my hobby.
There you go.
And I'm Tom Tyler. I used to work at WDC Radio in Chicago and WGN Radio and Television. Also, I'm presently working in a veterans program at Hines VA Hospital and hoping for a job in this position. Thank you.
Great.
And we have a guest star, a radio man from WARG, which is in Argo, FM 88.9 FM, and it's Bob Terziak.
Bob Terziak, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you all. Thank you.
We've known each other for about a week.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We go back far.
We've known each other for...
And we've lived close to each other for 25 years, probably, something like that.
Yeah, Chance Encounters, yeah.
But anyway, Bob has a show on Paranormal Radio, is the name of it?
Yes, it's...
Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. My show's called Paranormal Radioactivity. I'm on Friday nights on WARG. It's 88.9 FM. You're probably out in this area here. I don't think you'll get us because our range isn't quite that far. But go up online. We're on Facebook, and you can get us on that. And, gosh, we touch on just about every sort of facet of paranormal you can imagine. I've been bringing on a lot of guests, a lot of people that are big in the paranormal field. Richard Crow, Dale Tismeric, president of the Ghost Society of Illinois. I've had different psychics, spiritualists, mediums. Nobody that I contacted any of the dead presidents yet. So I've been trying for that one. Just a variety of different things. Last couple of shows we did too, you were going to touch a little bit on African History Month this month. And I had my show, not last week, it was the week before, I had Mr. Simeon Wright, who wrote the story, Simeon's Story, and his nephew, Wheeler Parker. And they're the gentlemen that knew Emmett Till. They were with Emmett Till. They were in the home when Emmett Till was abducted, and they came on and talked about all that. And, yeah, very nice gentlemen to meet in that. And last week we did some history. We had a band on. I had an alternative music band. And what we did is, just a chance encounter. I met them, invited them on for guests. I said, you have nothing to do with paranormal or psychic phenomena like I do, but we'll get you on. We can do a live performance, and I'm going to record you on an Edison phonograph. on a wax cylinder. We'll record you like you would have been recorded 100 years ago. So we did that on the air, and we had so many people. When I announced I was doing the show, so many people wanted to come on that show to see it, and the studio was so small we could just put so many in there. So I apologize to anybody that didn't get to come for that one. So.
Well, you know, Bob, President Lincoln, that we brought up presidents, was a vampire hunter.
That's coming out this summer. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
I mean,
President Lincoln's in the news this week. President Lincoln was in the news with the vampire hunter, and Dwight Eisenhower was in the news last week because there's evidence now that Eisenhower had contact with aliens. Now, not illegal aliens, but aliens from space.
I thought that was interesting.
Extremely, yes.
Because
it makes me wonder where he found the time to do all this in between, dealing with what he had to deal with the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation and with Mary Todd, and there he is out with his hatchet, vampire hunting.
Right, but if you see his progress, you can see he was before his time at a time when you didn't progress to the other side. I mean, let it be freeing of the slaves.
Yes, Abraham Lincoln was an extremely spiritual man, particularly after.
Yes.
I'm going to do a whole talk at our library in town, at the Summit Argo Library on April 11th. I'm going to do a whole talk on the haunted White House and on the spiritual connection to the Titanic. And Lincoln, of course, is one of our most spiritual presidents, and particularly after he lost his son, after Willie died on him in the White House. Now, Lincoln's had 4 sons. They lost Eddie when they were still in Springfield.
Yeah,
they lost Eddie, who was the second son. For Robert, of course, was their first. They lost Eddie in Springfield. Then when he went to Washington, they lost Willie. And right after Willie, that's when things really got kicking with the spiritualism and the seances in the White House. And, Lincoln was a very spiritually connected man.
Well, I'm sitting around such learned men, and all I know that there were 2 presidents, Washington or Lincoln. I mean, so there's a gap there in my.
Most of the kids today, if you talk to kids about the presidents, most of them that's what they know.
Isn't that amazing? And I did say to a child yesterday, I said, they were telling me they were off today, and I said, what do you know about Washington? He had wooden teeth.
Yeah.
I said to myself,
he didn't, though. They found that out. They weren't wooden.
I think that's been proven. But that made me laugh. But at the same time, I thought, you know as much as I do.
They know something, though, so it's worth it.
Exactly. Yeah. But
I'm going to do a whole. He cut down the cherry tree. They put a whole eye. I'm going to be doing a whole talk on the haunted White House because there's so much connected to psychic phenomena.
What date are you at the library?
It's going to be April 11th. Yeah, it'll be the week of Easter. It'll be Easter
What
Wednesday.
day is that?
Easter Wednesday.
What day?
April 11th.
Wednesday.
Yeah, April 11th. I'll be there from 6:30. They usually go an hour and a half, but I'm probably going to have to go 2 hours because we're going to be covering a lot of territory with that. Yeah. Oh, incidentally, so this year is the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, and the Titanic went down April 15th. It was a Sunday, and this year happens to be a Sunday, the anniversary, the 100th anniversary. So there's a lot of psychic connections to the Titanic, and
So anyway, there was this Chinese.
You have to shut me up because I keep talking. So
Chinese businessman. He's supposed to meet his Jewish lawyer to get some papers signed, and they. Well, see, you'll see why.
Is this a Chicago
This is what
story?
they call a segue. Yeah. Is this one of them there segues?
I'm trying to make the connection.
Segway sandwiches. Segway the foot-long sandwiches. But anyway, so he takes care of business. So they go out for lunch together, and then they're having a few drinks, and all of a sudden the lawyer turns around and sucker punches him and knocks him off the stool. And he says, "What was that for?" He says, "You Chinese attacking Pearl Harbor." He says, "The Chinese didn't attack Pearl Harbor. It was the Japanese." He says, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, all the same. So a few more drinks, and the Chinese guy, the businessman, he does the same thing to the lawyer, knocks him off. He says, "What was that for?" He says, "You Jews sinking the Titanic." He says, "The Jews didn't sink the Titanic. It was an iceberg." He says, "Iceberg, Greenberg, Goldberg, all the same."
Oh, jeez.
Well, you mentioned Henny Youngman. We're getting off the track
Yeah.
of the president.
Yeah, I know. I had another one that I thought, but you keep every time you say something, I think of another one. I don't know.
Well,
I
Henny
get that one.
Youngman went to the doctor and he says, "Hey, doc, my arm hurts when I do that."
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Do that.
The doctor actually told my wife that one time.
Have you had this before? I said no. He said, well, you got it again.
Well, everybody, you all know George Burns' doctor story, right? George Burns, famous comedian George Burns. Is it
Yeah.
true, Mr. Burns, that you like to smoke your cigars? Yes, I do. I still have it in my hand. Yes. You like your cocktails? Yes, I have a couple of cocktails every day. You like to date younger women? Yes, I do. What does your doctor say about that? Oh, he's dead.
Oh, good one.
Bob, did you ever hear? I might as well get in.
Go
here.
ahead.
A little.
Sure.
Did you ever hear Harry Truman talking about? He said, "Yeah, Abraham Lincoln They say he walks in the hallways every night.
Yes.
Have you ever seen him? No. Well, of course he was a Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah, knowing Harry, that would be the way, wouldn't it?
Harry Truman, we are very, very fortunate that Mr. Harry Truman happened to be the president when he did, because now if y'all remember your history, in 1950, the White House was on the verge of collapse. It was going to fall in. And at that point, they had to make a decision. Do we keep the executive mansion, or do we knock it down? Do we rebuild? And Harry Truman, being the president, they had a real strong sense of history that he had, said, no, we're going to rebuild. So fortunately, we still have the White House, thanks in big part to Harry Truman.
Otherwise, there'd be, what, a Kmart there or something?
Yeah, possibly. A Kmart or a Walmart or something. Yeah.
Didn't his piano fall through the floor or
Yes,
something?
it was actually his daughter Margaret. His daughter Margaret. Incidentally, there was another Margaret that tried for an operatic career, singing and recording career. Margaret Woodrow Wilson, daughter of Woodrow Wilson. She tried for a recording career too. She recorded with Columbia, and Margaret Truman tried the same thing. She tried to have an operatic career. She didn't quite make it. You know, she sang all right, but she didn't quite make it to what she wanted to. But actually, it was her rehearsal piano that actually went through the second floor in the White House. Yeah, when the Trumans were in residence. Yeah.
Well, you know, you mentioned getting back to our serious part, the presidents and so on. I have just a little bit to say about President Lincoln, and as I said, I'm telling about the guy I know, and I just thought some of these facts were kind of, not that they haven't heard him, but you know, if you want to get some deep thoughts about him, if you don't mind, I just want
That's why we're
to
here.
mention a little bit about him. Of course, we are now learning that he is the 16th president. He was born in 1809. And as of today, he'd be 203 years old. He's buried at the Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield. And that's where the Springfield Museum is, and where all his artifacts are. And, of course, he's known for the Gettysburg Address. And he did free the slaves in 1837. And I just thought, you know, little pieces of him.
Not in 1837.
No.
Was it? Okay, tell me.
No, 1837. He wasn't
64
president.
or 63?
64. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so
He issued
sorry.
the Emancipation
You can't work
Proclamation
late
in
at night.
He was considerably younger in 1837.
Okay, I'm
The Black Hawk
that.
War.
Yes, well, look at
Yeah,
already.
yeah.
He was playing
1809
with
is
the
when he was
Blackhawks.
born. My mistake. And he started politics in New Salem, Illinois. He was a Republican. He was a lawyer, and he certainly was raised in poverty. And he was a very moral and intelligent man, and he always wrote his own speeches. As you know, they're written for them. And he did have, like you said, Bob, he had a lot of heartache in his life. He married, and in that time, they had 4 sons. 2 died, and at very young ages. And his wife had a very bad shopping compulsion, very insecure lady, and of course after the deaths of her sons and then the assassination of Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth, who was an actor, she became mentally ill. And so they say to remember Lincoln, think of him as a martyr to the black civil rights. And,
Yes. Yeah.
and I just thought those were highlights that made him more human.
Yeah. Mary Todd Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln could not have been more on opposite sides of the fence. But yet the partnership between the two, it worked. It worked for them. She was an extremely difficult. Lincoln said it was easier to deal with the Civil War than it was to deal with Mary Todd. Studying back on her now, her illness and things, which were not understood at the time, of course, in the 1860s, they think now she was bipolar because she had these strange, bizarre, like you mentioned, her shopping.
Highs and lows.
She would take these shopping sprees out to New York and buy, 24 cases of kid gloves, which she would never wear. And later on in life, after her diagnosed insanity, that was her occupation in life. And later she was packing her trunks and unpacking her trunks for trips she was never taking. Yeah.
What was the quote? Something like, there's some good movies over the years have been about Lincoln, like Abe Lincoln, Illinois.
Raymond
Young
Master.
Mr. Lincoln.
Yeah. Most of
Henry
them,
Fonda.
Young Mr. Lincoln with Henry Fonda.
Yeah, Young Mr. Lincoln. That was about the same. One was old. Actually, Abe Lincoln, Illinois was a year behind the other one. But anyway, in the one he says he just meets her. He goes, Mary Todd of the Kentucky Todds. And And God only needs one D in his name or something like that.
Yeah, he used to say that the Todd spell their name with 2 D's.
Yeah.
The Almighty only needed 1 D for his name.
Yeah.
That gives you some idea where the Todds felt that they fit in the big scheme of things.
She was
Incidentally, there are no heirs to Abraham Lincoln's name. The only surviving, all his sons died in young age. The last son died at, well, Robert, of course,
1920 or something?
The
Robert
last
lived to 1925. Yeah, he lived to see the Lincoln Memorial
The
dedicated.
last
to his
descendant
father.
died in 1985.
Yeah, but Robert had 3 sons. He had an Abraham Lincoln Jr., which he would not allow him to use the name Abraham, even though he named him after his famous father. And he died at 17 years old, just about the same age as his
Eddie
brother did.
and
Yeah,
Willie, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Was Tad was one of them, or was that one of the
Yeah,
Thomas.
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 Thomas
named,
Tad.
named for
Tad.
his father, because
Yeah.
his father's name was
Yeah.
Tad.
And,
The interesting thing about Robert Todd Lincoln is he was in Washington, D.C. the night of the assassination. He was one of the many people
Connected with 3
that Abraham Lincoln had invited to go to the theater with him, and he had turned him down because he was on the staff of General Grant. He was home from the war. He wanted to go. He went back to the White House and went to bed. He was present in the railroad station with President Garfield when Garfield was assassinated, and he was in Buffalo, New York at the time of the assassination of President McKinley. And I always say that if he had lived long enough, he probably would have been in Dallas in 1963.
Yeah, Robert was
But-
actually he was actually invited by President McKinley to be with him, and he was there with him. And after McKinley's assassination, he said he would no longer appear with any presidents in public, but he did. In 1922, they have a picture of him standing with former President Taft, who was then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and with the sitting president, Warren G. Harding, for the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, Robert's father, Abraham Lincoln. And what happened, we all know, to Warren G. Harding, right? 18 months into his term, he died on tour in San Francisco. So Robert never appeared again in public after that, and then he died in 1925, yeah.
And there's a big Chicago connection too, because Robert Todd Lincoln lived in Chicago. Quite a bit of his, adult life. Started the law firm Lincoln. What was it?
Isham, Lincoln and Beale. Yeah.
And he lived on North Lakeshore Drive. The building, unfortunately, isn't there. It was like 1244. What today would be 1244 North Lakeshore Drive. And then after President Lincoln was assassinated, Mary came to live in Chicago. She lived about 1240 West Washington Boulevard.
It'd be Greektown now, wouldn't it?
Right.
No,
Ashland.
well, Greektown really to me is a long haul. That's
But I mean, was it still call that area Greektown?
I wouldn't, but
You wouldn't, huh?
no, I wouldn't.
Well, you
no.
wouldn't, would you?
West Town, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway,
West
Loop.
Loop.
Well, no, not West Town. I insist on West Town.
Okay.
Okay. And her one son. What was the son?
There was Robert, Willie, Eddie, and Thomas.
Okay, well, one of them went to the Brown Public School, which I can recall. It was at just east of the stadium at Warren and Wood. In fact, there is a newer building there, but I remember the old building. Anyway, where she lived is some sort of a factory building now, but there is a sign, there's a plaque, I should say, that indicates that's where she lived. So it was
She
interesting.
didn't end up like in a sanitarium or.
Well,
or was she in and
Robert
out?
put her, yeah,
Yeah, he finally had no choice.
he had her committed, yeah.
Her behavior had
in one
gotten
room.
so strange at one point. The thing that kind of put her over the edge, as far as Robert was concerned, was she was in Europe and she had to rush back on the first ship from Europe with the younger son. I think she was with Eddie, not Eddie, with Tad, and she had to come back from Europe because she was convinced that Robert was dying. She was so convinced Robert was dying. So she rushed back on the first ship that would sail her across the Atlantic. She came here, and there was Robert sitting in the chair, fine, nothing at all. And then she tried to jump out of a second-story window from an imaginary fire that didn't exist. And also, too, when she lived at the address you just mentioned here in Chicago, it was not uncommon for her to walk around the streets with $56,000 inside her petticoats because she was afraid of poverty. She had this big fear of poverty all her life, that after her husband's death, she was going to live in poverty. So she carried the money with her. So Robert,
$56,000?
$56,000 she would carry sewn into her petticoats.
Which was a lot of
Lot
money.
of
Oh,
money.
in those days, that was an
A lot of
extremely
money.
amount of money. In those days, it was a
Right.
tremendous
It
amount.
wasn't Confederate money now,
No,
was it?
she wasn't Confederate. Mary Todd Lincoln got a bad rap from, in her day, she got a bad rap from the press and a bad rap from, Washington society and everything. But actually, she had brothers that fought for the
Right.
Confederacy.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
she herself was opposed to slavery, and that's she said she made many choices when she
Yeah.
married Mr. Lincoln, and that was one of them she made. Yeah.
I'd say General Grant was another one of those that President Lincoln had asked to accompany him to Ford's Theater that night, and Grant turned it's inconceivable today that you would turn down the President of the United States. But Grant turned President Lincoln down for the simple reason that his wife could not stand Mary Todd Lincoln.
Absolutely not.
They had squabbled. There had been a review of the troops at which Mary had been in the same carriage with Julia Dent Grant, and Mary had gone out of her way to pick a squabble with General Grant's wife, and she just refused to be in the same theater box, and that was the reason that Grant was not their president. But I mean, even so, it's inconceivable today that anyone would decline an invitation to be the personal guest of the President of the United States.
Yeah, Julie Grant had said she would never stand on the same carpet that Mary Todd Lincoln stood on. She just despised her that much, yeah. And there's real strong evidence that when the Grants were in office later on, after the Johnson administration, when Grant became president, that they held seances and they actually contacted Willie Lincoln in some of the rooms in the White House, yeah.
Wow.
Grant was an interesting man, an interesting gentleman. He died from throat cancer, as we all know. Almost died in poverty were it not for his autobiography.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. Now, in these days, the president's,
memoirs,
I think the
right.
presidential salary was about $25,000, and it was costing him much more than that to be president. And he didn't have the personal wealth that a lot of the other former presidents had had. And were it not for his memoirs that he wrote, which became bestsellers, he left when he passed away. He left a lot of money to his family. So
And he finished within days of his death. He wrote the
Yeah.
last words just a few days before he died,
Yeah.
and it reestablished the fortune of his family.
Imagine the pain he must have been in those days.
extremely,
yeah.
Throat cancer.
Sure,
Throat
yeah.
cancer, right.
Yeah.
And
And,
not having
the guy
There are
days.
pictures of. I've seen pictures of him with a muffler,
Muffler,
you know,
yeah.
sitting
Trying
on
to
his
stay warm.
front porch,
Yeah.
or, you know,
Yeah.
working
That's
on
right.
He
working
loved to
on
Yeah.
he loved to sit on his porch and he would tip his hat to people that walked by passersby. He always had a word for people. You know, when he was still able to speak, he always had a kind word. He was a very beloved president. He had one of the most corrupt administrations in presidential history, but he was a very beloved president. When he came and took office, it was like the sky's the limit for him. They gave him like I think $125,000 for refurbishing and redecorating the White House, which was just unprecedented in those days.
enormous.
Yeah, it was an
Yeah.
enormous sum of money. That's why if you look at some of the pictures of like the redone East Room and all that, how they redid it. You know,
It was
during the Grant
redecorated in a style that was called
Steamboat
Steamboat
Palace.
Gothic. Yeah,
Oh.
Steamboat Gothic.
Yeah, yeah.
There's
It
a
was
style.
This was
There's
the
the
stuff.
style, yeah.
Then
It'll come back.
A few decades later, Theodore Roosevelt got rid of all of
Right.
it.
Well, there was
and-
another man in between
Right.
that did a lot of redecorating in the White House. That was Mr. Chester Alan Arthur. A lot of people don't know about his presidency. Now, Mr. Arthur was a very corrupt gentleman too. When he was in charge of the port of New York.
But an honest president. But
Well,
he was an honest
when he
president.
became president, he changed.
It's a
he
great
changed-
surprise
yes,
because he
yeah,
was looked upon as a corrupt New York
And now
politician.
you have to remember, the president that preceded him was James Garfield. Now, Garfield, of course, was assassinated, and Garfield lingered. He didn't die right away. He died. He got shot on 4th of July at the train station. He lingered through the hot summer in Washington. They actually put in like a makeshift air conditioning system in the White House in the 1880s
Nice.
to help keep him more comfortable. Yeah. And of course, then by the time Arthur, after Garfield died and his widow Lucretia Garfield moved out of the White House, Arthur now became president. He took a tour of the White House and he went through it and he says, "This place is so run down and so shabby. I'm not living here." He says, "I won't do it." So what he did is he did a walkthrough and he says, "This is staying, that's going with all the White House furnishings. This stays, that goes. This stays, that goes." Clean everything up. He had the first big yard sale at the White House. We opened up the attics. He sold 24. Yeah, he sold 24 wagon loads of furnishings, which went back to Monroe and Adams. A lot of this stuff did just at public sale. And he got rid of all this stuff. And his first time a professional decorator was brought in to redecorate the White House. That was Louis Comfort Tiffany. At that time, they were not in the jewelry business.
The
They were
Tiffany
decorating
family,
Tiffany
huh?
glass,
Yeah.
right? And there's the famous pictures. They have some photos, of course, black and white photos, of a big stained glass Tiffany screen that was in the front hall entry to the White House, which became a big tourist attraction for about the next 25 years until Theodore Roosevelt came into office and took it out. There's not a shred of that glass that remains. No one knows whatever happened to that glass from that window. Yeah, they think it was sold off to some hotel for like $200 or something, but no
Yeah.
one is certain what happened to it. And in addition to all
God
the other,
knows it's worth.
Oh, yeah.
It's around somewhere.
yeah, yeah. On the Antiques Roadshow, if you all watch Antiques Roadshow, the other day they had on a show where somebody actually had some of the china that their great grandparent had bought from this big yard sale that Arthur had held, where he sold all this stuff off, what he considered junk from the previous administrations to clear out the White House. Yeah.
And I think there were only 2 or 3 sets made, and they only had 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, now the Lincoln china,
Glasses.
there's very little Lincoln china left because the servants hated Mary Todd, so they would break her china. They did,
Uh-huh.
yeah, literally, they
and
did.
you just said Mary
Yeah.
Todd. I want to just say something. Didn't she have an? We're settling on her quite a bit, but like an ambiance of her thoughts. She was in her mind kind of a prima donna.
Yes, Mary
yeah.
Todd,
Yeah.
Mary Todd Lincoln. Yeah, very much. She fought to, all her life. She struggled with being first lady. She wanted to be a good first lady. She wanted to be, and the critics just lambasted her. And even after her son died, after Willie died in the White House, they thought she's making way too much out of the grief because this was a Civil War. I mean, there wasn't a family that was not untouched with a death.
But the other day on the news, and we probably all heard it, they just discovered that the picture they have of her in Springfield is not her.
Right.
Now, I was thinking, the little I knew about what I read about her is that it could have been her. They're really fighting the author of the picture. I mean, the maker of the picture. The
photographer.
The photographer.
Yeah.
And the point I'm bringing out is she might have, I don't think airbrushing and all of that was in then, I don't know. But maybe she saw herself as the most gorgeous person in the world and had some of her own.
Well, she came from a very wealthy,
Yeah, she did,
socially prominent family. Her family
Right.
did not consider Abraham Lincoln in any way a good match for
no,
her. It was
not
pretty much like Bess Truman's mother.
Yes.
Never thought Harry was going to, even after he was president, she thought he was never going to amount to
Amount
any.
to much.
A haberdasher?
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When are you
So
going to get a real
you
job?
know, there's a great similarity, but she came from what passed for aristocracy in Kentucky, and
But I just thought-
so she grew up with this rather positive attitude of who she was and who her family was.
But you know, like even as kids, you
Oh, yeah.
saw a movie star picture and you
Yeah.
wanted to be made over. Well,
most of the Lincoln
all
photographs
fake.
of Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln, especially the Washington years, were all Matthew Brady photographs.
Okay.
Because Lincoln loved to have his picture taken. For Lincoln, it was like therapy. He loved to be photographed. He loved doing it. He's probably one of the most famous,
Most photographed,
of the 19th century. Yeah, he
Is
loved
that right?
having his picture taken.
And
Yeah.
one-
And
one-
very few photographs of Lincoln and Mary Todd taken together.
there you
Yeah.
are.
No, there were.
That, that is surprising.
I
when
think
you
there is.
back
I think
on
there
it.
is one family
Maybe.
portrait with the boys, the younger
Okay.
boys.
Oh yeah,
and
there
with
are.
them,
They
but-
exist. The interesting thing is one of the reasons we visualize Lincoln with the beard is because virtually all the photographs made of him were made when he was president, and they all.
Right.
But prior to his election, of
He
course,
didn't
he was
have-
clean shaven.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
see the earlier photos of him. He was, and most of his life, he did not have a mustache, a beard, any kind of any kind of shrubbery on his
There's
face.
one or two photos out there with him having a partially grown beard. You see
Yeah,
the
there's
transition.
a couple
Yeah.
of reasons why Abraham Lincoln grew a beard. There's a couple of stories floating around that. One was he got a letter from a girl.
The girl in New York
And the girl just said, "Why
Yeah.
don't you grow a beard? You'd look more handsome."
during the campaign, she said
Yeah.
she said she could get all of her family to vote for him if he was a little more handsome.
Oh,
That's
Basically
one story.
said you're not the most handsome
our
guy that
voting
ever came
problem,
along.
isn't it? It is
Yeah.
our voting problem.
So why the long face, right?
That's one story. And then the other story is en route from Springfield to Washington for his inauguration, to be inaugurated as president, he grew a beard for disguise. Because almost from the incept of his election, when he got elected, there were death threats on Abraham Lincoln. So he did it for disguise. The Secret Service thought it would be a good idea for him to grow a beard so he
Or
wouldn't be so
perhaps
easily
Alan
recognized.
Pinkerton might have.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say,
Yeah,
Alan,
yeah.
Well,
who
even-
started the Secret
That's
Service?
interesting.
Yeah.
Even,
And was a Chicago detective at one time.
even the territories like Maryland did not succeed, nor did Kentucky or Delaware, but these were slave states
Right.
that had
Border states.
big.
There were 4 slave states:
Yeah.
Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky,
Missouri.
Missouri.
Missouri, yeah, that's right.
Did
Missouri.
not.
Missouri.
Yeah, they say Missouri is divided into the parts where they say Missouri and the parts
Missouri.
where they say Missouri.
Yeah.
It
And,
depends where
by
you're
the way,
from.
Like
by
two
the way,
states.
like Kentucky, they never seceded, but yet men went to both sides.
Right.
Yeah.
You had your aristocracy, and you had like my wife's relatives, the coal miners, and them. Really.
Lincoln once said, he says, in this war, I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky.
But by the way, do they pronounce the capital of Kentucky Louisville or Louisville?
They pronounce it Frankfurt.
That's right.
Very good.
You get put a star on the board.
Now you know why we have John here as a panelist.
How many have I passed up here already?
Yeah.
But I file them away for
Yeah.
you later.
Very
On
good.
President's Day, the subject of assassinated presidents, it's often speculated that if current medical knowledge was available at the time, very likely Garfield and McKinley would have survived.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
yeah.
unlikely that
Not
Lincoln
Lincoln
or
was,
even Kennedy.
Lincoln was
Yeah.
brain.
No.
They were brain
shot in the brain.
Yeah, even now
Yeah.
reading back on some of the things after Garfield's assassination, he was shot through the arm and through the back. And the probes and things, the instruments they used, even for the 1880s, was still it was very primitive. Even what they were using then, they were surprised they used it.
They were not disinfecting anything.
No,
they were
they
sticking
weren't.
fingers
No.
in the
Yeah,
wounds.
they were probing
Yeah.
it and everything. Yeah,
Well, they weren't knowledgeable about
Yeah.
germs and
That's
infections
right.
in,
That's right.
in the Civil War. The famous story, the surgeons in the Civil War would wipe the knife on their apron. As long as it was visibly clean, as long
Yeah.
as there was no dirt on the knife, they assumed that it was safe to
They'd
operate.
strap it on their sole, their shoe too,
Yeah.
back and forth.
more
Yeah,
soldiers
well-
died in the hospitals than died actually in the battles in Civil War.
Although,
More casualties.
Scary.
the use of ether came in during World War II,
So
during the Civil War.
Actually, it was a little prior.
right.
And actually, ether was a great setback for the lives of patients because ether made it possible to operate on people where previously they would not. It would have been too excruciatingly
No.
painful. With ether, they could put them to sleep and operate on them, but they didn't know about germs yet. So the people were dying of the infection
They had
because
the staph,
they were opening
sure.
up their bodies and the bacteria and
Definitely.
everything
Who
was
was it
killing them.
discovered that? Was it Lister? Was there someone named Lister who discovered what bacteria? Seriously, this isn't a
Sure,
joke.
that's where you had Listerine.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Don't
Yeah.
laugh. That's not a joke. There's no punchline
Bacteria,
there.
sure, the
And the street. I always come back to Chicago. We had two Lincolns. We had a Lincoln Street and a Lincoln Avenue. We still have a Lincoln Street. Lincoln Avenue is now Walcott, and
Lincoln Highway.
Lincoln Highway.
Hmm.
Everything Lincoln.
When it was
And
Nebraska.
the land of Lincoln,
There was a Lincoln dealer on Western before.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Lincoln, Nebraska.
Remember the story? Fred Allen joke. Senator Claghorn. He
Yeah.
said, "Son," he said, "I had a real bad week." He said, "What happened?" He said, "I waited for months and months ordering a new car, and it finally came. It was a Lincoln."
Yeah. Of course, it was much closer to the Civil War in those days.
Yeah.
That's one character. We're going to a break in just a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
But that Senator Claghorn, like a lot of times the cartoons would mimic the things like that became Warner Brothers Foghorn Leghorn.
Foghorn
Yeah.
Leghorn.
I always
say, boy, I say, son. Now let me tell you,
Yeah.
son.
I've always thought that the rooster was funnier than the senator myself. But anyway, that's time.
Boy, you're not paying attention. Listen up, son. You're not paying attention. To
I'll
what
say,
I'm
boy, I'm
telling
always
you.
running at the mouth. Yeah. We're going to go for our first break now. So I'm going to throw it over to the music and John and break.
Break.